Sarah Martinez never imagined that her morning jog through the quiet industrial district would become the most terrifying and empowering moment of her life. A 28-year-old emergency room nurse from Phoenix, she had always been the person others turned to in crisis situations. Her steady hands had saved countless lives in the hospital, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to happen on that seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning in March. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when she decided to take a different route through the warehouse district. It was quieter there, away from the busy streets and traffic noise that usually accompanied her runs. She loved these peaceful moments before her 12-hour shift at the hospital, when the world felt calm and full of possibilities. But sometimes the most unexpected moments reveal who we truly are underneath. Sometimes, when everything we think we know about ourselves is stripped away in an instant, we discover strengths we never knew existed. Sarah was about to learn that survival isn't just about physical strength or having the right tools. It's about the fire that burns inside when everything else is taken away. What happened next would not only change her life forever, but would also challenge everything people think they know about courage, determination, and the incredible power of the human spirit when pushed to its absolute limit. This is the true story of how one woman faced the impossible and emerged victorious, using nothing but her bare hands and an unbreakable will to survive. Sarah's running shoes made soft thuds against the cracked asphalt as she navigated through the maze of abandoned warehouses. The morning air was crisp, and she could see her breath forming small clouds in front of her. This area had once been a thriving industrial hub, but most of the businesses had moved out years ago, leaving behind empty buildings and overgrown lots. It was exactly the kind of solitude she craved before facing another intense day at the emergency room. She had been running for about 20 minutes when she noticed the black van parked awkwardly between two warehouses. Something about it felt wrong. The vehicle was too clean for this neglected area, and its windows were tinted so dark she couldn't see inside. Her nursing training had taught her to notice details that others might miss, and every instinct was telling her to turn around and take a different path. But before she could react to her gut feeling, the van's doors burst open. 5 men jumped out with a coordination that spoke of careful planning. They weren't random criminals looking for an opportunity. They had been waiting for someone exactly like her. A lone woman, far from any help, in a place where screams would echo off empty buildings with no one to hear them. The largest man, built like a linebacker with arms covered in tattoos, stepped forward holding something that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was a hunting rifle, the kind used for taking down large game. The morning sun glinted off its polished barrel as he pointed it directly at her chest. His smile was cold and calculating, the expression of someone who had done this before. Well, what do we have here?" he said, his voice carrying the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. "Looks like our morning just got a lot more interesting." Sarah's mind raced as she quickly assessed the situation. 5 men, all significantly larger than her petite 5'4" frame, one armed with a rifle. She was at least half a mile from the nearest main road, surrounded by empty buildings that could muffle any sound. Her phone was in her apartment, plugged into the charger because she never carried it during her runs, a habit that now seemed incredibly foolish. The second man, skinnier but with the nervous energy of someone high on drugs, kept glancing around as if expecting trouble. "We need to move fast," he said, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "Get her in the van now." The third man pulled out a length of rope from his jacket pocket, and Sarah realized with growing horror that this wasn't a random mugging. They had come prepared for exactly this scenario. They had been hunting, and she had walked directly into their trap. "Please," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "I'm just out for a run. I don't have any money or jewelry with me. Just let me go, and I won't tell anyone about this." The man with the rifle laughed, a sound that sent chills down her spine. "Money? You think this is about money?" He took a step closer, and Sarah could smell alcohol on his breath, even from several feet away. "We've been watching you for weeks. Same route, same time, same predictable little nurse, thinking she's safe in her perfect little world." The words hit her like a physical blow. They had been stalking her, studying her habits, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. All those mornings, she had felt so peaceful and secure. They had been watching from the shadows, planning whatever sick fantasy they intended to carry out. The fourth man, middle-aged with graying hair and dead eyes, moved to block her path back the way she had come. "The smart thing to do is cooperate," he said in a voice that was somehow more terrifying than outright threats. "Make this easy on yourself." The fifth man, barely out his teens, but with the hard expression of someone who had seen too much violence too young, was recording everything on his phone. "This is going to be epic," he said with disturbing excitement. "We're going to be famous." Sarah realized that running wasn't an option. They had positioned themselves to cut off her escape routes, and even if she could outrun some of them, the man with the rifle could stop her before she made it 10 feet. Her nursing experience had taught her that panic was the enemy in any crisis situation. She needed to think clearly, observe everything, and wait for any opportunity that might present itself. The man with the rifle gestured toward the van with the barrel. "Time to go for a little ride. And before you get any heroic ideas, I want you to know that this rifle holds 5 bullets. I've been hunting since I was 12 years old, and I never miss what I'm aiming at." As they began to move closer, Sarah noticed something that gave her the tiniest spark of hope. The man holding the rifle was gripping it incorrectly. His finger wasn't on the trigger, and he was holding it more like a club than a precision weapon. He might talk a big game about being a hunter, but his body language suggested he wasn't as comfortable with firearms as he wanted her to believe. The drug-addled man reached for her arm, and Sarah pulled back instinctively. "Don't touch me," she said with more authority than she felt. "Feisty," the leader said with approval. "I like that. It makes things more interesting." But as he spoke, Sarah was calculating distances and angles. She had taken self-defense classes in college, though that felt like a lifetime ago. More importantly, her work as an emergency room nurse had given her an intimate knowledge of human anatomy. She knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage, where the most vulnerable points were located, and how much force was needed to disable an attacker. The question was whether she would get the chance to use that knowledge. Right now, they held all the advantages. But Sarah had learned something important during her years saving lives in the emergency room. Sometimes the most desperate situations could change in an instant if you were ready to act when the opportunity presented itself. "Move toward the van," the leader commanded, gesturing with the rifle. "Now." Sarah took a small step forward, but her mind was working furiously. She needed them to make a mistake, to get careless for just a moment. Because once they got her in that van, once they drove her to whatever isolated location they had in mind, her chances of survival would drop to almost zero. The morning that had started so peacefully was about to become a fight for her life. And though she didn't know it yet, Sarah Martinez was about to discover that she possessed something far more dangerous than any weapon: the absolute refusal to become a victim. The moment that changed, everything happened so quickly that even Sarah wasn't sure exactly how it started. She had taken 2 steps toward the van when the youngest member of the group, the one recording on his phone, made a critical error. In his excitement to get a better angle for his video, he moved directly between Sarah and the man with the rifle. "Get out of the way, you idiot," the leader shouted, trying to step around his accomplice without lowering the weapon. That split second of confusion was all Sarah needed. Years of emergency room training had taught her to recognize the exact moment when a life could be saved or lost, and she knew instinctively that this was her only chance. Every hour she had spent learning to act decisively under pressure, every crisis situation she had navigated, had been preparing her for this moment. She lunged forward with explosive speed that surprised even herself. Her target wasn't the man with the rifle, not yet. Instead, she drove her knee upward into the groin of the drug-addicted man who had tried to grab her earlier. The strike connected with devastating accuracy, and he collapsed to the ground, screaming in agony and clutching himself. The sudden violence shocked the other men into momentary paralysis. They had expected fear and compliance, not this fierce resistance from someone they had assumed would be an easy victim. In that moment of hesitation, Sarah proved that she was anything but easy prey. The young man with the phone tried to grab her, but Sarah spun toward him with the fluid motion of someone who had spent years moving quickly through crowded hospital corridors. She drove her elbow back into his solar plexus, a strike she remembered from her college self-defense class. The impact drove the air from his lungs and sent him stumbling backward, gasping and unable to breathe properly. "Shoot her!" the middle-aged man screamed, but the leader was struggling with the rifle. In his panic, he had forgotten everything he thought he knew about handling the weapon. His hands were shaking, and he couldn't get a clear shot with his own men scattered around the area. Sarah didn't give him time to figure it out. She charged straight at him, using the element of surprise that came from doing the last thing anyone expected. Instead of trying to run away from the man with the gun, she ran directly toward him. Her nursing background had taught her that sometimes the most counterintuitive action was the correct one, just like how you sometimes had to cut deeper to save a life. The leader's eyes went wide with shock as this small woman bore down on him like a force of nature. He tried to bring the rifle up to point at her, but Sarah was already too close. She grabbed the barrel with both hands and twisted sharply to the right, using a technique she had learned not from any self-defense manual, but from watching countless wrestling matches with her brothers when she was younger. The rifle came free from his grip more easily than she had expected, and she realized that her initial assessment had been correct. He really wasn't comfortable with firearms. The weapon flew several feet away, clattering against the concrete wall of the nearest warehouse. But now she faced a new problem. The leader was easily twice her weight, and without the rifle, he was furious. He swung a massive fist at her head, and Sarah barely managed to duck under it. She could feel the air displacement as his knuckles passed inches from her skull. "You crazy witch," he roared, launching himself at her with the kind of rage that came from having his authority challenged. "I'm going to tear you apart." Sarah backpedaled quickly, trying to stay out of range of his powerful arms while looking for another opportunity to strike. The middle-aged man was moving to flank her, and she could see the young man starting to recover his breath. She was running out of time before they could coordinate their attack. That's when her emergency room experience saved her life once again. She had learned to assess a patient's condition in seconds, identifying the most critical issues that needed immediate attention. Looking at the leader's face, flushed red with exertion and rage, she could see the telltale signs of someone whose cardiovascular system was under extreme stress. When he charged at her again, Sarah didn't try to match his strength. Instead, she used his momentum against him. At the last possible second, she dropped low and swept his legs with a move that was part martial arts, part playground tactics. The leader's own weight and forward motion sent him crashing to the ground hard enough that she could hear the impact of his head against the concrete. He didn't get back up immediately, and Sarah could see that he was dazed. But there was no time to celebrate this small victory. The middle-aged man had circled around behind her, and she spun just in time to see him pulling a knife from his jacket. "You just made this a lot more interesting," he said with a cold smile that sent chills down her spine. "I was going to make this quick, but now I think we're going to take our time." The blade looked wickedly sharp, and Sarah knew that her luck was about to run out. She had managed to neutralize 3 of her attackers through surprise and quick thinking, but she was getting tired, and this man looked like he actually knew how to use the weapon in his hand. The young man had recovered enough to stand up, though he was still wheezing and holding his chest where her elbow had connected. The drug addict was trying to get to his feet as well, his face twisted with pain and fury. Even the leader was starting to shake off the effects of his fall. Sarah realized with growing dread that she had only delayed the inevitable. She had fought harder than they had expected, but now they were angry instead of just predatory. The middle-aged man advanced slowly with the knife, forcing her to back toward the wall of the warehouse. Nowhere left to run, he said conversationally. You know, I actually respect what you did there. Took real guts. But it's over now. Sarah's back touched the cold concrete of the warehouse wall, and she knew he was right. She was trapped, exhausted, and facing a man with a knife who clearly had experience using it. Her brief moment of triumph was about to turn into a nightmare. But as she stood there, pressed against the wall with nowhere left to retreat, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected. Instead of despair or resignation, she felt a burning anger unlike anything she had ever experienced. These men had stalked her, terrorized her, and tried to destroy her life for their own sick entertainment. They had underestimated her once, and she was about to prove that they were still making that same mistake. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning, and Sarah Martinez was about to show these predators what happened when you cornered someone who absolutely refused to be defeated. As the man with the knife moved closer, Sarah's mind entered a state of crystalline clarity that she had only experienced a few times in her life. It was the same feeling she got during the most critical moments in the emergency room, when a patient's life hung in the balance and every second counted. Time seemed to slow down, and she could see every detail with perfect sharpness. The knife in his hand had a 4-inch blade with a serrated edge. He was holding it properly, with his thumb along the spine for control, suggesting real experience with edged weapons. His footwork was confident, but not professional, probably self-taught through violence rather than formal training. Most importantly, his eyes kept flicking to her hands, watching for any sudden movements. Sarah had spent enough time treating knife wounds to know exactly what that blade could do to human tissue. She also knew, from her anatomy training, that the human body had several pressure points that could cause immediate incapacitation if struck correctly. The question was whether she could reach them before the knife reached her. Last chance, the man said, stopping just outside striking distance. You can make this easy, or you can make it hurt. Your choice. Behind him, the other attackers were regrouping. The leader was back on his feet, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead where he had hit the concrete. The drug addict was limping but mobile, and the young man had recovered his phone and was recording again, apparently excited by the escalation of violence. Sarah noticed something that made her heart race with hope. In her peripheral vision, she could see the hunting rifle lying against the warehouse wall where it had fallen. It was about 15 feet away, impossibly far under normal circumstances, but maybe not impossible if she could create the right opportunity. You know what? Sarah said, straightening up and looking the knife-wielding man directly in the eyes. You're absolutely right. I do have a choice. She had learned something important during her years as a nurse. Sometimes, when dealing with violent or unstable patients, the best strategy was to appear to comply while positioning yourself for action. Medical professionals called it de-escalation, but Sarah thought of it as controlled aggression. The man smiled, thinking he had broken her spirit. Smart girl. Now, he never finished the sentence. Sarah exploded in emotion with every ounce of strength and speed she had left. But instead of trying to dodge away from the knife, she did something that went against every survival instinct. She moved toward it. Her target was his wrist, specifically the cluster of nerves and tendons that control grip strength. She had seen this technique used by hospital security when dealing with patients who became violent, and she knew that striking the right spot with sufficient force could cause immediate loss of motor control. Her fingertips, hardened by years of intense hand exercises required for delicate medical procedures, drove into the pressure point like a surgical instrument. The knife fell from suddenly nerveless fingers, and Sarah caught it before it hit the ground. The man stared at his useless hand in shock, giving Sarah the split second she needed to reverse their positions. Now she was the one holding the knife, and he was the one backing away in fear. Ow! He gasped, cradling his paralyzed hand against his chest. Anatomy lesson, Sarah said grimly. I know exactly where everything is and how to break it. But she wasn't done yet. The other 3 men were moving to surround her again, and she knew that holding the knife only bought her a little more time. She needed to end this permanently, and that meant getting to the rifle. The leader was shouting orders, trying to coordinate an attack that would overwhelm her even with a knife. Circle around. She can't get all of us. He was right, and Sarah knew it. But she had one advantage they couldn't account for. She was fighting for her life, while they were just fighting for their twisted entertainment. The difference in motivation was about to become clear. Sarah feinted toward the drug addict, making him stumble backward in panic. Then she spun and sprinted toward the rifle with everything she had left. The young man tried to intercept her, but Sarah had spent years running through hospital corridors during emergency situations. She was faster than he expected and more determined than he could imagine. She reached the rifle just as hands grabbed at her from behind. Without thinking, she spun around and used the weapon like a club, driving the stock into the ribs of the young man who had nearly caught her. The impact sent him to the ground, gasping and clutching aside. Now, Sarah had the rifle, but she faced a new problem. She had never actually fired one before. She could see it wasn't loaded, but she had no idea how to operate it properly. Her knowledge of firearms came entirely from treating gunshot wounds, which gave her a healthy respect for their power, but no practical experience. The leader seemed to realize this at the same moment she did. She doesn't know how to use it, he shouted to the others. Rush her! But Sarah had learned something important during her nursing career. Sometimes confidence mattered more than competence. She raised the rifle and pointed it directly at the leader's chest, hoping her inexperience wasn't obvious. I spent 3 years treating gunshot victims, she said with authority she didn't feel. I know exactly what this will do to you. The men hesitated, unsure whether she was bluffing. In that moment of uncertainty, Sarah heard something that made her heart soar with relief. Sirens in the distance, getting closer. The drug addict heard them too. Cops, he screamed. We need to go now. But the leader wasn't ready to give up. He had been humiliated by a woman half his size, and his pride wouldn't let him retreat. She's bluffing. The gun isn't even loaded. He started toward her again, but Sarah surprised everyone, including herself, by charging at him one more time. She had realized something crucial. She didn't need to know how to shoot the rifle to use it as a weapon. The stock was solid wood, and she had seen enough head trauma cases to know how much damage a blunt object could cause. The leader tried to grab the barrel, but Sarah reversed her grip and drove the stock upward into his chin with every ounce of strength she had left. The impact lifted him off his feet and sent him crashing to the ground, where he lay motionless. The sirens were getting louder now, and the remaining attackers finally understood that their situation had become hopeless. The drug addict was already running toward the van, and the young man was limping after him, abandoning his phone in his haste to escape. The middle-aged man with the paralyzed hand looked at Sarah with something approaching respect. This isn't over, he said quietly. Yes, it is, Sarah replied, keeping the rifle pointed at him. And if you ever come near me again, I'll finish what we started here. He backed away slowly, then broke into a run toward the van. Sarah could hear the engine starting as the police cars rounded the corner, their sirens wailing and lights flashing. As the van disappeared around the corner of a distant warehouse, Sarah finally allowed herself to collapse. The rifle fell from her shaking hands as the adrenaline that had sustained her through the fight began to fade. She had done it. She had survived an impossible situation and emerged victorious. The first police officer to reach her was a woman about her own age, who immediately knelt down beside her. Ma'am, are you hurt? We got a call about gunshots. I'm okay, Sarah managed to say, though her voice was shaking. They tried to kidnap me, but I fought them off. As more officers arrived and began processing the scene, Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed inside her. She had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed, a fierce determination that surprised even herself. The men who had stalked her thinking she was an easy victim had learned a painful lesson about underestimating the power of someone who refused to be defeated. The entire confrontation had lasted only 83 seconds from the moment the first man grabbed for her until the van disappeared. In that brief span of time, Sarah Martinez had transformed from potential victim to victor, using nothing but her bare hands, her medical knowledge, and an unbreakable will to survive. Later, as she gave her statement to the police, Sarah realized that she would never again be the same person who had gone out for a peaceful morning run. She had been tested in the most extreme way possible and had proven to herself that she was capable of anything when her survival was at stake. The 5 men who had planned to destroy her life had instead given her something precious, absolute confidence in her own strength. They had taken away her weapon, but they could never take away what she had discovered about herself that morning. And Sarah knew that knowledge would stay with her forever.